The knock came at dusk in the middle of a snowstorm so thick Hank Merritt could not see 10 feet past his porch. He opened the door and found a woman standing there with a baby wrapped in her coat and a trunk at her feet. She was covered in snow, shaking. Her lips were blue. "I am Ruth Harper," she said. "Your brother sent me." Then her knees buckled and Hank caught her before she hit the ground. The baby in her arms did not make a sound. Hank looked at the woman, at the baby, at the trunk, at the storm that was getting worse by the minute. He had no choice. He picked her up, brought her inside, and kicked the door shut behind him. This is one of those stories where necessity becomes something else entirely, where obligation turns into choice. If you want more stories like this, stories that remind you how quickly everything can change, subscribe so you never miss one. Drop the name of your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels, because what happened after Hank Merritt carried that woman across his threshold became the story people told in Silver Ridge, Montana, for the next 60 years. Hank Merritt had been living alone on the mountain for 4 years when Ruth Harper arrived. He had built the cabin himself after his brother moved to Denver and offered him the land. Hank was 32 years old and tired of people, tired of noise, tired of expectations. So he went up the mountain and built a life where the only voice he heard was his own. He trapped in winter and worked odd jobs in town when he needed supplies. He read by lamplight and cooked simple meals and learned to live with silence. It was not a happy life, but it was a peaceful one, and after years of chaos in cattle drives and boomtowns, peace was enough. Until Ruth Harper knocked on his door in November of 1886. Hank carried her to the chair by the fire and set her down carefully. The baby was still wrapped in her coat, and when Hank tried to take the bundle, Ruth's arms tightened, even though she was barely conscious. "It is all right," Hank said quietly. "I just want to see if the baby is breathing." Ruth's arms loosened. Hank unwrapped the coat and found a baby boy, maybe 4 months old, with dark hair and a face red from cold. The baby looked at him with wide eyes and did not cry. Hank checked him quickly. Breathing was steady, no frostbite on the fingers or toes, just cold, very cold. He wrapped the baby back up and set him in Ruth's arms. Then he went outside and dragged the trunk in from the porch. It was heavy. Whatever was in there, it was all she had. By the time he got back inside, Ruth was starting to wake up. Her eyes opened slowly, and she looked around the cabin like she did not know where she was. Then she looked down at the baby, and her whole body relaxed. "Is he all right?" she asked. Her voice was hoarse. "He is cold, but he is fine. What about you?" "I am fine." "You collapsed on my porch." "I was tired." She sat up straighter, wincing. "Your brother said you would help me." "My brother?" Hank sat down across from her. "Which brother?" "Charles. He said you owed him a favor and that you would let me stay here until spring." Hank stared at her. Charles was his older brother, the one who had given him the land, the one who had helped him build the cabin. And yes, Hank owed him. Charles had loaned him money when he was broke, had vouched for him when no one else would, had never asked for repayment. "What did Charles tell you?" Hank asked. "That you live alone on a mountain, that you have space, that you would not turn away a woman with a baby in the middle of winter." Ruth looked at him. Her eyes were gray and direct. "He said you were a good man, even if you did not act like it." Hank almost laughed. That sounded like Charles. "What are you running from?" Ruth's jaw tightened. "My husband. He died 6 months ago. His family wanted to take the baby, said I was not fit to raise him alone. I left before they could take him to court." "So you are running from the law?" "I am running from people who think they have a right to my son." Her voice was hard now. "I did not break any laws. I just left. And came here. Your brother said it was far enough away that no one would find me. He said I could stay until spring and then figure out what to do next." She looked down at the baby. "I did not have anywhere else to go." Hank looked at her sitting there with the baby in her arms, and he thought about telling her she had to leave. Thought about how much easier his life would be without a woman and a baby in his cabin. But outside, the storm was howling, and the temperature was dropping, and it was 15 miles to town through snow that was waist-deep in places. He could not send her out in that. Charles had known he could not send her out in that. "You can stay," Hank said, "but there are rules." "What rules?" "You and the baby sleep in the loft. I sleep down here by the fire. You do your own cooking and cleaning. You do not ask me for anything I do not offer, and when spring comes, you leave." Ruth nodded. "Agreed. What is his name?" Hank gestured to the baby. "Daniel, after my father." How old is he? 4 months. He is quiet. He has always been quiet. Sometimes I worry about it. Ruth looked at Daniel with an expression that made Hank's chest tighten. Fear and love mixed together. But the doctor said he is healthy, just quiet. Hank stood up. There is stew in the pot. Eat something. Then get warm. We will figure out the rest in the morning. That first night set the pattern for all the nights that followed. Ruth took care of herself and Daniel. Hank kept to himself. They moved around each other like boarders in the same house. Polite, but distant. But small things started to change. Ruth cooked, not just for herself, but for both of them. The first time it happened, Hank came in from checking traps to find 2 plates on the table instead of 1. He stopped in the doorway. "You did not need to do that." "I was making food anyway," Ruth said without looking at him. "Seemed wasteful not to make enough." He sat down and ate. It was venison stew with potatoes and wild onions she had found in the cellar. It was the best meal he had eaten in months, maybe years. He finished the whole plate and set it in the basin without saying thank you. But the next morning he left firewood stacked by the door to her room. She did not thank him either. They just did things for each other and did not talk about it. The cabin started to change. Ruth swept the floor every morning. She washed the windows until they were clear. She mended the curtains Hank had been meaning to fix for 2 years. She organized the pantry and scrubbed the table and made the place look like somewhere people actually lived, instead of somewhere a man was just surviving. Hank noticed all of it. Noticed the way the lamplight seemed brighter now that the glass was clean. Noticed the way the cabin smelled like bread instead of damp wool. Noticed the way Ruth moved through the space like she belonged there, even though she was supposed to be temporary. Daniel cried sometimes at night. Not often, but when he did, Hank could hear Ruth walking back and forth in the loft, singing in a low voice to quiet him. The song was one Hank's mother used to sing, and hearing it in the dark made him remember things he had tried to forget. His mother rocking his youngest sister, his father humming the same tune while he worked, the family he had left behind when he came to the mountain. One night, Daniel would not stop crying. Hank lay by the fire and listened to Ruth walking and singing for over an hour. Finally, he climbed the ladder to the loft. Ruth was standing by the small window, holding Daniel against her shoulder, swaying back and forth. Her face was exhausted. "Let me try," Hank said. Ruth looked at him like she did not quite believe he was there. Then she handed him the baby. Daniel was hot and fussy, his little fists clenched. Hank held him against his chest and started walking in slow circles, the way he remembered his mother doing. He hummed the song Ruth had been singing, and slowly, Daniel quieted. His breathing evened out, his fists unclenched. Within 10 minutes he was asleep. Hank looked up and found Ruth watching him with an expression he could not read. "Thank you," she whispered. He nodded and carefully handed the sleeping baby back to her. Then he climbed back down the ladder and lay by the fire and did not sleep for a long time. One morning in December, Hank came back from checking his trap lines and found Ruth scrubbing his floor. He stopped in the doorway. "You do not have to do that." "I know." She did not look up. "But the floor was filthy." "I was managing." "No, you were not." She sat back on her heels. "This place was falling apart. You were living like an animal." "I was living the way I wanted to live." "Well, now you are living with other people, so it needs to be clean." Hank should have been angry. Should have told her it was his cabin and she was a guest, and she did not get to decide how he lived. But he looked at the clean floor and the swept hearth and the windows that she had washed until they were clear, and he could not find it in himself to be angry. "Fine," he said. Ruth went back to scrubbing, and Hank went outside and chopped twice as much wood as usual. The weeks passed. December turned into January. The snow piled higher. Some days Hank could not get down the mountain to town. They were trapped together, the 3 of them, and slowly they stopped being strangers. Hank learned that Ruth was 24 years old and had been married for 3 years to a man who was kind but sickly. He had died of pneumonia, and his family had blamed her for not taking better care of him. She had no family of her own, no money, no prospects, just Daniel and a trunk full of clothes, and a determination not to let anyone take her son. "They said I was too young," Ruth told him one evening while they sat by the fire. Daniel was asleep in the loft, and they had fallen into the habit of talking for an hour before bed. "Said I was not capable of raising a child alone. But I raised their son through 3 years of illness. I kept him alive longer than any doctor thought possible. And they still said I was not good enough. You are good enough, Hank said. Ruth looked at him. How do you know? Because I see what you do every day. How you take care of him. How you work from dawn until dark. How you never complain even though you are exhausted. He looked down at his hands. You are the strongest person I know. Ruth's eyes filled with tears, but she did not let them fall. Thank you. Ruth learned that Hank had worked cattle drives from the time he was 15 until he was 28. That he had seen too many men die from stupid reasons. Bar fights, stampedes, infections from cuts that should not have killed anyone. That he had come to the mountain because he was tired of watching people destroy themselves and each other. I saw a man die because he would not admit he was sick, Hank told her. He kept working until he collapsed. By the time we got him to a doctor, it was too late. He was 23 years old, and he died because he was too proud to ask for help. Is that why you live alone? Ruth asked. Because you are tired of watching people die? I am tired of caring about people who will not take care of themselves. He looked at her. It is easier to care about no one. Is it working? Hank did not answer, because the truth was, it had been working until she arrived. And now he was starting to care again, and it terrified him. And Daniel learned to smile at Hank. It happened slowly. First, Daniel would watch Hank from Ruth's arms, his dark eyes following every movement. Then he started reaching for him when Hank walked past. Then, one day in late January, Hank sat down near the fire, and Daniel crawled over to him and pulled himself up using Hank's leg. Hank looked down at the baby clinging to his pants and did not know what to do. He likes you, Ruth said from across the room. He is just a baby. He does not know any better. He knows. Ruth came and picked Daniel up, but the baby twisted in her arms and reached for Hank. See? He wants you. Hank held out his arms, and Ruth handed him the baby. Daniel settled against Hank's chest and looked up at him with those wide, dark eyes, and something in Hank broke open. He had not held a child since his niece was born 8 years ago. Had not wanted to. Children meant attachments, and attachments meant pain. But Daniel was warm and solid and trusting, and Hank found himself holding the baby like he was something precious. He is getting heavy, Hank said, his voice rough. He is growing. Ruth sat down beside him. He likes you more than anyone except me. That cannot be true. It is. Watch. She held out her arms. Daniel looked at her, then looked at Hank, and stayed where he was. Ruth laughed. See? You are his favorite. After that, Daniel spent more time with Hank. When Ruth cooked, Hank held Daniel. When Ruth cleaned, Hank took Daniel outside to show him the snow and the trees and the mountains. When Daniel fussed, Hank walked him around the cabin until he quieted. And when Daniel laughed for the first time, a burbling, delighted sound, it was because Hank was making funny faces at him across the table. Ruth stood in the doorway and watched them. Hank looked up and saw the expression on her face, something soft, something that made his stomach flip. What? He asked. Nothing. She turned away. Just did not expect you to be good with children. I am not. You are. She looked back at him. He loves you. I can tell. Hank did not know what to say to that. So he just kept making faces until Daniel laughed again. In February, a warm spell hit and the snow started to melt. Hank went to town to get supplies, and when he came back, he found Ruth packing her trunk. His stomach dropped. What are you doing? Getting ready. She did not look at him, just kept folding clothes with mechanical precision. Spring is coming. You said I had to leave when spring came. It is still winter. Barely. Another few weeks and the passes will be clear. I need to start planning where to go. Her voice was flat, empty, like she had already left in her mind. Where will you go? I do not know yet. She folded a dress and placed it in the trunk. Somewhere far from here. Somewhere his family will not find us. Maybe California, maybe Oregon, somewhere west. Hank set the supplies on the table with more force than necessary. You do not have to leave. Ruth stopped packing, her hands stilled on the fabric. Slowly she turned around. What? You do not have to leave. You can stay. You said when spring came. I know what I said. Hank pulled off his coat and threw it toward the hook by the door. It missed and fell on the floor. He did not pick it up. I said you had to leave in spring because I did not want you here. But now— He stopped, swallowed hard. Now I do not want you to leave. Ruth crossed her arms over her chest. Why? Because this cabin is better with you in it. The words came out rough, unpolished. Because Daniel— His voice caught. He cleared his throat and tried again. Because Daniel lights up when he sees me, and I never knew I wanted that until I had it. Because you sing in the mornings, and it is the best sound I have ever heard. Because I— He stopped, could not finish. Because you what? Because I do not want to be alone anymore. The admission cost him something. He could feel it in his chest. I thought I did. I came up here because I wanted silence and isolation, and no one needing anything from me. And then you showed up and ruined all of it. You and Daniel. And now the thought of you leaving makes me feel like— He stopped again. Like what? Ruth's voice was soft now, careful. Like I am losing something I cannot get back. Ruth took a step toward him. That is not a reason for me to stay. What would be a reason? You telling me you want me here. Not because the cabin is better, not because Daniel needs you. Because you want me. Me specifically. Not just someone to fill the empty space. Hank looked at her standing there with her gray eyes steady on his face, and he realized she was right. It was not about the cabin or Daniel or the cooking or the singing. It was about her. About the way she had walked into his life without permission and made him want things he had given up on wanting. About the way she looked at him sometimes, like he was not just a man hiding on a mountain, but someone worth knowing. About the way his heart had started beating differently the day she arrived and had never gone back to normal. I want you here, he said quietly, firmly. Both of you. Not because I need a housekeeper or because Daniel is convenient. Because I want to wake up and see your face. Because I want to come home and have you here. Because I want to fall asleep knowing you are upstairs and wake up knowing you are still there. I want you, Ruth Harper, specifically you. For how long? As long as you want to stay. He took a step closer. Forever, if you will let me. Ruth's eyes filled with tears. I do not have money to pay you rent. I do not want your money. Then what do you want? I want to wake up and hear you singing. I want to come home and find Daniel waiting for me. I want to eat meals across from you instead of alone. I want— He stopped, swallowed hard, started again. I want this, what we have now. I do not want it to end in spring or summer or ever. Ruth crossed the remaining distance between them and stood close enough that he could smell the soap she used. I want that too. Then stay. On one condition. What condition? You stop sleeping down here by the fire like a boarder. You sleep in the loft with us, as a family. She reached up and touched his face. Her hand was warm against his cold skin. As my husband. Hank's heart was pounding so hard, he was sure she could hear it. As your husband? Yes. Ruth's voice was steady now, sure. I love you, Hank Merritt. I have loved you since the day you carried me inside, even though you did not want to. Since you held Daniel that first night and checked him for frostbite with hands that were so gentle, I knew you were a good man no matter how hard you tried to pretend otherwise. And I am tired of pretending I do not love you. I am tired of sleeping alone in the loft and pretending this is temporary, when it has not felt temporary since the second week. Hank pulled her against him and kissed her. It was not a gentle kiss. It was desperate and hungry, and full of months of wanting something he had not let himself name. When they broke apart, Ruth was crying and Hank was shaking. I love you too, he said. I did not want to. I tried not to, but I do. Then marry me. What? Marry me. Not because you have to. Not because I need protecting. Because you want to. I want to, Hank said. God help me, I want to. They were married in March in the small church in Silver Ridge. Daniel sat on Ruth's lap during the ceremony and clapped when it was over. Half the town came, not because they knew Hank, most of them barely knew he existed, but because word had spread that the mountain man who lived alone was marrying the woman who had shown up on his porch with nothing but a trunk and a baby. When the preacher asked if anyone objected, no one said a word. When the ceremony was over, Hank kissed his wife and picked up Daniel and carried them both out of the church. Someone shouted congratulations, someone else whistled. And Hank, who had not smiled in public in 4 years, grinned like a fool. They went back to the cabin and lived there for the rest of their lives. Ruth kept the house clean and cooked meals that made the cabin smell like a home. Hank worked his trap lines and expanded the land and built additions as more children came. 3 more sons and a daughter. The cabin became a house. The house became a homestead. And the man who had wanted nothing but silence learned to love the sound of children laughing and his wife singing and life happening all around him. Daniel grew up strong and quiet, with his mother's gray eyes and Hank's steady hands. He never remembered arriving in a snowstorm or sleeping in a strange loft or being carried inside by a man who did not want him there. He just remembered his father teaching him to trap and his mother singing and a childhood full of love. People in Silver Ridge talked about Hank and Ruth Merritt for 60 years. They talked about the night she arrived with nothing but a trunk and a baby. They talked about how Hank had no choice but to let her in. And they talked about how sometimes the things you have no choice about become the things you would choose over and over again if you could. Ruth Merritt died in 1945 at the age of 83. Hank died 2 months later. They were buried on the hill behind the cabin where they had spent 59 years together. On Ruth's headstone, Hank had carved the words he told her the night he asked her to stay. She arrived with 1 trunk and a baby. I had no choice but to let her in. And then I had no choice but to love her. And then it was not about choice anymore. It was about keeping what I could not live without.